And we are now recording, so please just let me know if you'd like me to pause at any point so that you can say something off the record. Hey Sid, you made it in. How are you doing?
Good.
Good, good.
Hello, Sydney.
Hello there. Nice to be back.
Lovely. It's really such a pleasure having this beautiful extended community. Okay, so here we are. And what would you like to do today? We're ostensibly here for horizontal communication support, and we can do anything.
So some questions that have been going around in my head have been around if somebody maybe is a bit conflict avoidant and you're trying to deal with stuff, and especially with the if it's not able to be face to face, then you have to. I was wondering about that, like phone calls or text. I'm guessing. I don't know. I'm guessing it's more ideal to wait or not. I've been wondering about those things.
I think quite a few of us are wondering about those things during these times. You know, it's one thing to postpone a conversation for a few days. It's another to postpone a conversation for a few months.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Has anybody else got something that we should take note of before we just dive in? If you'd like to make sure we get to it today, now's the time.
Can we please go over the first step of acknowledging a situation or reflecting feelings? I always get stuck with words there, and I feel like what I'm saying doesn't come out the way that it should.
Okay, so I just want to check, are you talking about observing, neutral observing, or about empathy, or both?
Leading into both, but I think the very beginning of the neutral observing, I really battle.
Okay.
I seem to say things in such a stupid, obvious way that it's not conducive. It's like more irritating than factual.
Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. Anybody else got something that we want to pop onto the list there? Okay, shall we dive in then? And of course we can bring up, we can follow the flow and see where it goes and also follow what comes up. So where shall we begin then? I'm inclined to go backwards. I'm inclined to start with looking at the neutral observing and then taking that into how to use that to get into the conflict avoidance, and if it can't be face to face. How does that sound? Yeah? Okay.
I'm fine with that.
Great. Okay, does anybody have anything to offer? Anybody want to comment on, when you're sort of describing the situation, trying to make sure everybody's on the same page, we all know what we're talking about, how to do that in a way that's useful rather than having people look at you and go, yeah.
So can I give a concrete example?
Fantastic. Love concrete examples.
Okay. So my teenage daughter is really having a hard time at the moment, just boy stuff and lockdown stuff. And when she's melting down or asking for help in a way that, say, she's crying, or she kind of puts on a face that she wants me to ask, and I can see she needs me to engage. I battle to find the vocabulary. Like, this is the kind of thing I'll say, and this is the kind of thing that will irritate her. Like, I'll say, it looks like you're feeling really sad and frustrated and lonely,
Okay.
or even disappointed, and all of those words are all wrong. They're all irritating, and it's almost as if she can see what I'm trying to do and actually gets annoyed with me.
Okay.
And I don't know how to do it in a way that is not so, it's like practiced. It's like clunky, you sometimes call it.
Okay.
That's where I'm stuck.
So here's the thing as well. I'm just sort of trying to think also, with personalities and preferences that people have. There's just a question or thought. If we consider the whole high and low context thing, is it maybe too many words, too explicit, too spoken out loud? Does she maybe need a slightly more kind of implicit empathy that isn't quite so spelled out?
So the reason I do that is because she really likes to have support, or she's a child that likes instructions. If she asks for an opinion and I say it neutrally, she'll say, but I'm asking you what you think, what you would do. Like, she likes a very clear picture. And I feel like when I only use one word, first of all, it's limiting. I mean, if I say sad, it's on one hand a feeling, but on the other hand, it's quite vast. And I feel like she kind of like waits for me to carry on and paint a more specific picture, which is why I bring in all the words. And also I try to help her, because if I say, how you feeling, she battles to pick the words, I suppose, like me, and she doesn't know how to say it, so she waits for me to kind of strew something that she can pick up from.
Okay. And what are you guessing her need is in that moment when she's kind of crying and waiting for you to say what's what?
So I don't know if it's hormonal emotions. I don't know if it's relationship emotions. I don't know if it's mixed. I don't know if she wants a hug, or I don't know if she wants to sit and talk, or I don't know if she's feeling like we haven't spent time together. And it could be any of these, but I don't think she knows how to articulate exactly what that is and where it's coming from.
And what do you think's happening when you start articulating that and she gets annoyed?
That she can see exactly what I'm doing, and it bugs her.
Okay, what is it that you are doing that bugs her?
I'm trying to understand what she needs from me.
Okay, so what about that is bugging her?
It's the way that I say it. It's the clunkiness in the beginning, where I almost like get myself into the right mode and concentrate on what I'm saying. It doesn't flow naturally, and I don't know if I don't know what the issue is. I don't know what my stumbling block is. I don't know if it's a lack of vocabulary. I don't know if it's a lack of practice. I don't know what it is, but I really get stuck at the beginning.
Okay, I'm going to try something on for size here.
Okay.
If she's feeling she needs connection in that moment, and then you have to kind of disconnect and go into your head to look for words, and then she feels a loss of connection?
Yeah, that sounds very precise, yes.
Okay. How would she be if you didn't say a single word, but you opened arms for a hug, and then took time to find your words while doing that, instead of disconnecting, standing back, looking for words, trying to use the words to connect? I don't know. How would that work for her, do you think?
That would actually be very good. Very, very, very good. Because what may happen from there, and has happened when I've done that, is she actually just bursts into tears. So maybe that is actually what she's looking for. Okay, I'll try that. Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Great.
I just had a thought on the clunkiness side of it. I guess if, like, when I hear you say you're feeling sad, like, it does. It just seems weird. But I wondered if rather than saying, it looks like you're feeling sad, is just to ask, are you feeling sad? So, you take your observations and you turn them into questions. I don't know if that would be useful.
Mm-hmm. So again, I think it depends a lot on the interaction. It can become a roadblock, which is why questioning is one of the Thomas Gordon roadblocks. It depends how it's experienced by the other side. But yeah, the way to find out is to try it and see if it works.
In my particular situation with my particular personality daughter, I would get a kind of reaction like, no, I'm happy. What does it look like I
Yeah. Yeah. So sorry, go for it, Talia.
Well, while I was listening, something I thought I'd try is like, so you see her that she's crying, and you see this, and it sounds to me like she's showing you, like she's saying, help me, or that she's showing you.
Mm-hmm.
What came to mind was, the kind of the eye contact and like,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
want to talk about it or something, just want to do you want to talk, or something like that, like, but first it's like, but keeping just like listening and watching for if she's going to say something, or because that's what you're wanting. And why you're trying to say, it looks to me like you're sad, you're trying to, but if you try and, I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah.
It is very, I actually feel like it's switched a light on in my brain.
Yeah.
Because as I'm listening to the words you're saying, I'm realizing that my older child is very verbal. So when there's a problem, I'm so used to it's almost like a verbal instruction, and then I understand exactly what I need to do. And possibly because she's the second, I've never really paid attention to this. And as you've said that, it's like switched something on in my brain that the language is completely different. This is non-verbally showing me.
Yeah. Great.
Sure. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So that's the thing, the slightly less verbal empathy, it's still completely empathy, it's still tuning in, it's still checking it out from a place of humility, because you could be wrong. So what I was about to say just before you shared that, which was brilliant, was I was going to say sometimes I would, in those sorts of circumstances, drop it down to like a single word or just a sound and a look. I would either sort of maybe go, sad, it depends, again, what the relationship is. But if it's that obvious, I'm sort of barely reality checking, I'm more empathizing. So it might just be sad, or it might just be sort of a kind of look and sound. It's like I'm with you, I can see what you're feeling. And I just want to read here what Randy's saying here, because this is lovely. I've been making sure I'm coming from a place of true curiosity. When I think too much about the process, it gets messy. So I ask that what is being articulated to be repeated so that I can really listen from my heart, not my head. And this allows for more reflection for my daughter as well, which is sometimes all is needed is just to speak the hurt. Yeah, absolutely. So you're just making a space for their feeling to flow into, so that they're not holding it tight inside themselves anymore. It can actually come out of them, because you're creating a place for it to land. So yeah, it's like finding the exact words is articulating it, which can create a container sometimes for self-insight, but especially when there's already enough self-insight but there isn't anywhere for the feelings to go, then it's not really articulation that's the need so much as safety, company, connection. And then the words are much less important, and you can even be completely silent. As long as there's a knowing that, I've sometimes gone and sat next to somebody without touching them, without saying a thing.
Sure. I love that, Randy, from the heart rather than the brain, because You know, as I'm picturing the situation and I'm listening to the input, I'm realizing that it's actually so I can understand my oldest child better because I'm also verbal and I'm also able to articulate myself and my feelings easily. So when I'm in the situation with her, it naturally comes to me the way I would want somebody to deal with it, like I would want to. But the shift that I'm realizing is that I actually have to think about it from her side and what she needs and what she's asking for and how she feels rather than the right steps. It's more like feeling what she's feeling and having the intention in feelings of rather being sensitive than finding the correct words. I love that. That is very powerful.
Yeah, and that's beautiful, and I love the way you articulated that, because I just want to pause for a moment and highlight that you've just shown us how even in the earlier stages of this thing, it's also about a competition between solutions. My solution is that I will find the right words and that will give you what you need.
Right.
Whereas her solution is not that.
Sure. Interesting.
So that horizontal empathy, getting inside somebody else's reality.
Brilliant. Thank you. This is so helpful.
Cool. Thank you for bringing it. So rich.
Question.
Hello.
Thank you. Hello. That was a really phenomenal discussion. Thank you. And it just kind of brings to mind, so part of horizontal communication, being able to understand how the other person likes to communicate or how they go about showing their emotions or their feelings. So you just articulated some people are very verbal, some are more, I don't know, introverted. I don't know if you want to say more about that, because thus far on my journey of horizontal communication has been about words. But what this has brought up is, in fact, it's a lot, it's not just about words, it's about other forms of communication, which I find, is there anything you want to say about that, just as I'm rambling off the top of my head?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if you've been involved since I started talking about the high and low context culture and stuff, because I think there's a lot of it in there. So just very much in brief, should I go over that or not?
Please do go
I
over
haven't,
that.
so
Yeah.
other people
So
that might.
yeah, so this is actually from mostly from the business world that they really started articulating this. I mean, it's really a sort of an anthropological insight into culture, but I think it applies right down to even inside ourselves, our relationships with ourselves. So unfortunately, somebody else got to name these things because I find it quite difficult to remember which is which. But the idea is that high context culture means that there's a lot of context. It's about the between the lines and the nonverbal cues, and what we all know from the past, kind of our shared context, what we know about the situation, is where most of the meaning lies. Whereas low context culture is where it's all about, it doesn't really matter how I said it, it's what I said. It's exactly the words I used. I chose them precisely, and that's what they mean. So in the business world, this has become a thing that people train people in this because of all of these deals that don't happen. When somebody from a high context culture is doing business with somebody from a low context culture, and so let's just say, a very Western style businessman thinks he's doing a deal with somebody in the East, and he thinks he's got it wrapped up because the exact words were, that yes, we'll do this thing. And what he hasn't understood is that he should have understood from, the tone of voice and the fact that obviously this deal couldn't take place, and they were just helping him save face by not saying to his face, no, sorry, we don't want to do business with you. But he was supposed to pick up from the whole thing that he was being very politely told to go away. And then he goes home and celebrates his deal and nothing happens. And then the classic example that I'm learning to use all the time because everybody seems to get it, is, the wife comes into the kitchen and says, well, the rice isn't cooked. And the husband says, but you just told me to put it in the steamer. You didn't tell me to switch it on. So, these mutual differences in expectation around where will the meaning lie. But what I see is that even in ourselves, it's like even within one person, we have some things that are very high context and some that are very low context. We've got some areas where we expect it to be about the exact words that were used, and we've got other areas where we expect people to know, remember, realize, and read into it. So at the same time, I think we do have sort of cultures that are slightly more, or a lot more high or low context, and we also have personalities that are a lot higher or lower context. So for some of us, we are mostly very comfortable when things are spelled out and explicit, and we can actually dot the I's and cross the T's, and we get the words straight. Whereas others of us find that very hard to deal with. And we really want people to, to read our subtext. So it becomes a kind of a cross-cultural thing. So again, if we're really talking about empathy and everybody matters, the low context culture is famous for wanting to impose itself on the high context culture and call the high context culture irrational and inferior and unreasonable, and insist that it must articulate itself in very, very clear words before it can be taken seriously. It's again can be very dominant, and the other way around. The classic "you should have known," "I'm not telling you, you should have guessed." Anything can be vertical and weaponized. But if we're really trying to get inside somebody's point of view, it helps to also just be aware of this source of misunderstanding. Does that help?
So, yes. I think you talk about culture. It's obviously a sort of a macro level perspective. At the same time, with family, you have two different children, different ways of interacting with the world. So my point, or my question is, in terms of horizontal communication, when you are at that point of trying to create a neutral understanding of what's going on, like using words, you describing it neutrally.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens when you're in a situation where you dealing with a person, with a child who doesn't want you to say things because it just shows them that you're not giving a heart connection, you're kind of using your mind.
Mm-hmm.
So is it possible to kind of give not a neutral word description, but a neutral showing that you are not judging? I don't know if that makes sense. In other words, instead of using words to neutrally describe something, you are showing them.
I think it's a matter of adding enough empathy.
I think it also depends on the personality of the person, because what I've realized in this conversation is that for my daughter, the answer is absolutely, like you said, Yana, a hug. A hug, and Thalia, maybe a sound. It's so clear to me now. I can't actually believe I didn't see it before, but that's what I imagine that you're getting at, Al. It's like, how do you show them rather than tell them if they're not the kind that needs to be told? Am I understanding you correctly?
Correct, yeah.
So the thing is that the point of that first step is to make sure that everybody's on the same page, right? So if everybody is already on the same page, then you don't have to spell it out. So it's like, I don't have to say you are crying. I might. If I'm trying to focus myself, I'm trying to focus us all on, we are focusing on the fact that you are crying. We're not focusing on the fact that the vase is broken on the floor, or whatever it is. But if you're in a situation where somebody's going to find that disconnecting, then yeah, you would prioritize the empathy. And the empathy can come into the words if you need the words as well. So, I mean, there can be an enormous amount of empathy packed into your balloon flew away. You lost hold of it and it flew away. There can be huge empathy in that completely objective statement. But again, it comes back to that thing of anything can be weaponized. It's not necessarily even weaponized. It's like anything can be disconnecting if it's done in a way that's disconnecting. So again, this is why for me it's so important with the horizontal communication that I keep emphasizing. It's not what you do, it's the way that you do it. It's not what you say, it's the way that you say it.
The intent.
It's what's in it.
Yeah. I think what I'm also trying to work out in my mind is one can see this as a sort of two different ways of being able to communicate, verbal and non-verbal. But what I'm actually saying is the non-verbal is not just one. What I'm trying to unpack is the different ways of non-verbalness, or showing rather than saying.
Yeah.
So that in itself could be a whole different, a long discussion.
Yeah.
So I'm not suggesting that, we take up that time now, but that conversation, thank you, was very profound for me.
Yeah.
And just wanted to explore a little bit more about the non-verbal, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm happy.
But that's great, because the thing is that we're also bridging into the first question about when somebody's conflict avoidant, and especially if it can't be face-to-face. Because obviously when something's not face-to-face, we've got a whole new layer in dealing with this whole thing of verbal versus non-verbal and all of these other contextual cues that we can rely on when it is verbal. And when we have body language. I mean, how do you do this, Taryn? You've had this insight now, and now you're not in the same space as her, and you can't give her a hug, and you have to do this over the phone. Or even worse, by text.
Yes.
So this is where I kind of get quite interested. I'm interested at the moment in looking at how the high context and the low context can come together in terms of using spelled out explicit words to communicate stuff that would normally be high context and non-verbal when you can't use the high context and non-verbal. I'm quite interested in that at the moment. How do I empathize effectively using text with somebody who's fairly high context? Yeah.
High context, doesn't that mean the words work well?
No, you see, this is why this is why I say it's a pity somebody else named this, because I find it very confusing. High context means a lot of context. You need a lot of context, high levels of context. So no, that low context would be the words are exactly it. And you know what? You know why I think we get this confused? Because I think in the Western culture, high is good and superior, and academic is the top of the chain. So I think that's why we get it confused, is actually because of a cultural loading on the word high that associates it with wordiness.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think there's all of that's like muddled in there. So I don't know. I've been wondering if, given that I haven't found very much discussion of this high-low context issue outside of the business world, I'm wondering if I can just rename it something. So yeah, suggestions are welcome for something that's a bit more intuitive.
So which one is when you're really spelling it out and
low
saying
context.
exactly what it is?
Yeah, low context.
Context.
Yeah, the context doesn't matter.
So you might have more words. I mean, you might be in low context and spelling it out and saying it exactly what nothing is, and assuming no common assumptions or background.
Yeah.
And you might have a lot more words.
Or less. But the point is that you mean exactly what you say, no matter how you say it. So if I say no, I mean no. I don't mean please offer me a higher price. And if I say yes, I mean yes. I don't mean look, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but go away. So that's low context.
Okay.
I mean, I think for me the thing is actually about articulation. And for instance, you're very good at verbally articulating. So the question for me is then what are other forms of articulation that we might need to attune to when entering a situation?
Especially when it's not face to face, I think is what we want to focus on in this particular moment. Yeah.
Okay, so that, yeah. But then that not face to face does actually come back to me, written or verbal words, comes back to words often. Yeah, but it is a question of articulation.
Yep. Say what you mean what you say.
Yeah, but again, in a high context situation, words change, meaning changes.
Yeah. And sometimes you might need to articulate even more. It's tricky. I mean, I'm quite interested by the development of the whole emoji thing. As Randy's saying, their emojis are super useful. I mean, they used to annoy the heck out of me. I had a kind of an initial reaction against putting these little pictures in between the words. And then I kind of realized, hang on a second, this is actually a tool that I can use to add a little bit of tone of voice here. And now I can't get enough emojis. Yeah, I'm really stumped when I'm using an app that doesn't have its own inbuilt emojis, and I sometimes find myself having to go and try and cut and paste them or replicate them, and there aren't enough of them for all the subtleties. And then of course the other option is to use more words and describe what's going on, almost like a screenwriter writing action for to be acted out. It's like
And the weirdest thing I find is that the emojis are subtly different depending on the font. So the sad
yeah,
face has got like a sort of a different twist to it.
yeah.
In this font, it's weird.
Yeah, and then there's that confusion about the one face that some people think is a really wide, toothy grin, and other people think is really angry with all the teeth showing. I've seen lots of communication problems around that confusion. And how are those fat face emojis that email does? It's like, oh no, sorry, yeah.
No, I just really struggle with the whole sea. The whole sea of them. Like you look through, whoa, there's just too many. There's too many. Okay, forget an emoji. Then I discovered you could actually search. It's like, I want this. And then there's like 4 to choose from. Okay, I can do that.
Okay, and Tasha's just also added here that grinny one. She says it's worried. So there's an interesting question here that I want to go into. So Tasha's saying, are SDE spaces high context or low context? It's weird because they describe high context cultures as collectivist, value interpersonal relationships, and have members that form stable, close relationships. But most of the spaces I know are very explicit. So for me, one of the things I am loving so much about SDE is that it's the only place I've found that balances everything, I think, brilliantly. So for me, an SDE space is an excellent balance of high and low context, because it's the only kind of system I've seen where individual liberty is maximized to 100% and the collective good is maximized to 100%. It's not actually a trade-off. So if you look at this high context culture description here, collectivist, value interpersonal relationships, have members that form stable, close relationships, it sounds like horizontal heaven, except it's not. Because take that to the extreme and you don't have any individuality, and you're sacrificing yourself for the collective good all the time. So you'll actually find a lot of very high context cultures are actually very brutal. on the individual level to those who want to step out of them.
Yeah, and the same true for normal schools. It's all about the school and the collective, especially can I say that the well-known schools. You're a pupil of this school, and it's all about the reputation of the school. There's no room for any individuality there.
Yeah, uniforms. So very, very broadly speaking, low context cultures usually prize individuality and high context cultures collectivism. But, we don't want these either ors anymore, these polar opposites that have caused humanity such pain. We actually want to find those best of everything integrations. Yeah, the greys. I like to think of it as a rainbow, Tasha. I suppose grey has its advantages, but I mean, if you look at the range between black and white, one way is grey and one way is rainbow when you split those colors up. So let's get back on track here. How do we deal with things when somebody is conflict avoidant and it can't be face to face? So they are not really coming actively to the party. They're sort of trying to escape, and you can't go face to face. How do you do it? Has anybody found any great solutions?
Is a phone call an option? Because I think a phone call with the sound of the voice could be more connecting than reading a text.
That's possible. I've lost myself. So yeah, on the other hand, you also have to get the person to agree to it. When somebody's conflict avoidant, and then there's pros and cons to phone calls and Zooms. They're not necessarily better. When you're in a physical space with somebody face to face, there's a lot of other layers that are very subliminal but very important. You can see or sense the whole body. You can pick up the heart rate variability. I think on some level you can probably even pick up brainwave emanations completely subconsciously. You're picking up pheromones unconsciously. You can hear a different level of tone of voice. There's how you are sitting relative to each other in the space. There's a lot of very, very subtle stuff that becomes. Are you familiar with the uncanny valley concept in like making androids and stuff and humanoid robots? So the uncanny valley is when something gets creepy because it's so realistic but not quite. So you'll notice that there's a move towards less realistic little robots because they're actually cuter if you make them less realistic. And then of course there's the idea of the completely deceptive one that you can't tell, which is great. But that uncanny valley in between, where it's just almost human, is just it's very disconcerting. Thanks, Graham. So there's an uncanny valleyness. There's a tongue twister in there. About phone calls and about Zoom, where you've almost got the person in person but you haven't, so you kind of think that you should be picking up all of the contextual stuff but you're not, so you're inclined to be overconfident, and if you're both really good in that medium, great, because different people cope better with different media. I'm a writer. I love text. I love low context stuff. It works very, very well for me. And I can do the very, very high context face-to-face thing very well. But I struggle with those intermediate mediums like the one we're using now. And I actually find if we add video, I'm going to struggle more than if we just have voice, which is why this is my preferred way of doing it. Because when I have video, I find that I start trying to scan all of your faces, trying to get the information that I expect if we're sitting in the same room, that I can get in the same room. And I actually can't focus properly. It's easier for me to drop that out and just focus on the voices that I can hear. But my preference would be to sit with all of you in the same room. I think then we would actually have a different level of power. So then to some extent, I'd rather go to text. Because then I'm dealing with low context and I can actually control it on a low context level. Does that make sense?
Yep.
It definitely
would
makes sense. I
never-
think that what we're talking about, though, is, I mean, if I understand it correctly, Talia's wondering about during this time. Is that accurate? Like how to deal with it during this time, or is it in generalization?
At this time, I mean,
Yeah.
I would never, ever try and resolve something over text, ever.
Right.
Yeah.
I've got to try and resolve a conflict over text.
Yeah.
It's impossible. Yeah.
I might try on a phone call, but on a text, never, ever.
Yeah. So you see, that's where, as I said, it depends on your comfort zones and your basically your strengths and the other person's strengths.
Yeah.
On the other hand, this is where I find WhatsApp quite fascinating, because WhatsApp enables somebody who's very weak on text but good with voice to communicate with somebody who's very good on text but weak on voice, because you can have a voice note followed by a text reply and vice versa. But there's times when I have to come out of my text comfort zone and send a voice note for the moments when it's just not possible to capture enough of the context with the words. But what I would suggest, just to kind of answer and reply here, is I would suggest a lot of preparation. And even if you're not going to resolve it by text, I would suggest writing it out so that you can get the best low context words and then be able to deliver them with as much of the high context holding that you can.
So you mean like writing it out? You don't mean giving it to them?
Well,
you mean writing it out for you?
Yeah. So
What
that
we're
you've
talking about really
optimized both the low and the high context. You've chosen exactly the right words, and now you're going to deliver them optimally. Sorry, Randy.
Well, I think we're in a new we're shifting, right? We're having to really deeply look at because we're going to have to solve problems. They're going to arise. And so how is it that we can solve them? And I think that's the question you're asking, right? And so we can't solve it how we used to solve it. So like maybe actually writing it out and actually sharing, not exactly what you're writing for yourself, but articulating in writing and then following up with asking for, can we come together live? So then that person feels like, oh, I know what this communication is going to be about. I can sit with it for a little bit, and then I can come and have a communication about it because when you're in person, you really are able to tune in, like you were saying, and you know what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you have a conflict, you're not sure if you're all on the same page because we're not in the same room. So by actually spelling it out in writing and then following it up maybe with an in-person might be we have to add steps
Mm-hmm. That's great. Love that. And that might be something to low contextually acknowledge before you begin. You know, you might need to spell out, this is tricky, so I'd like to deal with this over, you know, a few installments. Could we have a couple of written exchanges and a couple of chats?
Yeah.
So, from a while back, I was wondering about, it's not only is that unfortunately things have moved on, so I'm not sure how to.
We can give you a moment
So
to.
if
Mm-hmm.
somebody is so if someone is conflict avoidant, or you suspect, and then you suspect there may be something up or something, but everything is a bit detached, so you don't know. I don't know. I was just wondering about that as well,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of everything being so over virtual, over online, and
Mm. It actually.
anyway.
Sorry, Al. Yeah.
Well, I just want to throw in a question along with what Taylor just said. Are we talking right now about a general, like, adult to adult conversation, or within the context of a school, so adult to child or group of children? Because I think that makes a difference, does it not? To how you go about trying to
Can you just unpack that a little
correctly.
bit more?
Well, if you're an adult and talking to another adult, then email makes sense, or uh, using the written word might make more sense. But if you're whatever in a Discord group with children around the world, and you feel like there might be something up in that, with one person or one child, then you deal with it differently. I'm just asking what the context of this conversation is about. Is it just adult to adult, or is it like in the school context?
I'm not necessarily seeing a difference according to age. I mean, unless you talk, unless you mean literacy level. But I mean, literacy level isn't necessarily age related.
Well, yeah, but sure, but I mean, with some people, certain ages might be more comfortable with email. So if we're talking about verbalizing, writing something down, email, I would email you, but there's children I wouldn't email. So I'm just trying to get a sense of what, who are we talking about when we're talking about this conflict avoidance, and we're trying to find resolution for that.
Hmm. So are you looking more for Thalia's specifics so that we can help her more with the specifics of the situation?
Well, yes,
Hmm.
but just a general observation as well.
Okay. I guess I just want to nudge assumptions, because I think that, yeah, we do need to take the individual into account, and how appropriate will it be to email or write or whatever. But I think I just want to nudge assumptions that we can do that by age, because it ain't necessarily so.
Go ahead, I'm nudged.
Cool. Let's move on. Just to say briefly, for example, writing a letter to a pre-literate child can be wonderful. Sometimes it's very, very meaningful. And then they have to get someone to help them read it, or maybe they'd come in to ask you to help read it. But it gives a different opportunity to communicate in a different way at a different pace. That sometimes is exactly what's needed. That's just an aside.
I just want to say I really appreciate how you articulated that, Gianna. I'd like to give you a nudge around the assumptions because I was going to say something very different, but I really, really appreciate that.
Cool.
I missed that. Can you say that again, Randy?
I was just appreciating how Yana articulated wanting to nudge Owl into, or not even Owl, everybody, into not assuming around age.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
Not sure that was very clear, but
Yes, I get exactly what you're saying.
So, I mean, the summary of what we've got so far is that, the more complex the situation, the more you need to bring to it. And that it's not about choosing necessarily between high and low context. It's about, hitting it with all you can muster. And taking everybody's strengths into account in choosing what to do. But I mean, there is also, I think what we haven't addressed there is the conflict avoidance in itself, is that, if somebody has reservations about tackling something, no matter what the medium, how do we do that? Because somebody can just as easily shut things down and walk away when it is face to face.
a long time ago, someone said to me, "You really need to understand who's in front of you." In this case, not physically, obviously. And so, at what point do we really have to just resolve it within us and let go of the outer resolution because it's not wanted in that moment, or it's not being asked for or able to be held?
Yep. So consent is a thing. And there's also times to advocate strongly for ourselves. And again, I think there's balance and there's choice. That old prayer about having the courage to change the things I can and the grace to accept those I can't, I think very much applies to dealing with somebody who's conflict avoidant. Even when we're labeling them conflict avoidant, that's even something to nudge. So
Right, respecting where they're at. Like, they might not be ready to even deal with that because they've got other things more pressing on their plates to deal with, right? To unpack something that they're not ready to unpack is not serving.
And it might not
their
be
soul.
theirs. Yeah, and it might not be theirs to deal with. Sometimes it's just ours to deal with, especially if somebody's triggering us. And that's where I find the Byron Katie process hugely useful, because you can focus absolutely on somebody else and all your issues with them explicitly and bring it home and have all the insights without having any interaction with that person at all, and resolve it completely in myself. And then there are times when it is important to advocate strongly for my own inclusion, because it's also, if I'm just letting somebody else define the terms of the engagement all the time and I'm not happy with that, then there can also be a time for saying, I matter. And then, my suggestion would be to empathize and try and find the need and the feelings behind the so-called conflict avoidance, and try to describe the situation and empathize. It's when I say I want to talk, you look like you want to get out of here fast. I'm guessing this isn't exactly what you feel like doing right now. And maybe you'd rather that we don't, and you'd like me to just leave it alone, and it's really frustrating and annoying to you that I've got this need to actually keep hanging on to this issue, and it's really important to me because da da da, you know, and my feelings are da da da. Request, you know, would you be willing for us to sit down and what are there any sort of ways that we can do this that would make it more comfortable for you, and try and problem solve, not about the issue you're trying to tackle, but try and problem solve about the fact of being able to communicate about the issue. So bring it up a level. We're not going to talk about whatever that hot topic is, but can we start by trying to resolve the possibility of us having a communication about it becomes your higher order problem to tackle and find a solution to, preferably a win-win solution. And all sorts of things might come out of there. Maybe they would prefer you to write them a letter. Maybe that would feel more comfortable because it's hard for them to sit there with highly sensitive information, but if they can read something completely in private and not have to face you for 2 hours afterwards, maybe they can tackle it. So I don't know why this has just come to mind, especially as we are now sort of in the little wrapping up stages of the call. But I'm prompted to mention again clean language and symbolic modeling. I don't know if anybody's kind of picked that up. It's sort of a peripheral, sort of optional recommended thing I mention every now and again. Okay, Tara, no worries. Go well. See you next week.
I'm not sure I've heard you say that. Can you talk a little bit more about it?
Okay, so you maybe want to look it
That's
up.
right. Yeah, I can look it up.
Okay, I'm going to just write it here as well. No, but not instead of. I mean, I'll just very briefly. But it's also a way of facilitating another person without contaminating their point of view with yours. But some of these questions, it's got very defined questions, tools that can be used. And some of them can be quite useful in these situations, especially I'm just thinking in this circumstance. It's like, and when I want to talk about this and it's really important to me, but it's very uncomfortable for you, what do you want to have happen? Yeah.
Got it.
And how would you like us to be oriented to each other? And where would you like us to stand or sit? You know, these very, very neutral terms that can actually make quite a big difference to negotiating somebody's comfort, almost on kind of feng shui principles, but you know, completely internal organic feng shui principles. It's very possible that somebody would be comfortable sitting with their back to you with a sheet over their head, and now we can talk. You know, humans are weird. We are. You know, maybe I need a drink in my hand. Maybe you need to be doing your knitting. Maybe we need to be driving together in the car. You know, it's like also engaging that playful aspect, especially with now let's nudge me about ageism, but usually younger people are more open to these sorts of things. But it's, you know, it's not unusual for me personally to have somebody who needs to be sitting under the table to be able to have a chat, you know, or or needing to be holding a particular toy, teddy bear or something, or I can talk about this if I've got the cat on my lap. And I think adults have the same kind of completely unique set of needs. It's just sometimes maybe we need to open that up again and allow some of that playful creativity to enter in. And that might, just raising that kind of possibility in a playful, empathic, friendly way could also be part of what could break a deadlock when somebody's feeling very anxious about conflict.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. It's more of a needs-based check-in around how we are going to communicate or approach an experience or an exchange. Is that?
Well, it might be a needs-based check-in, yeah. It might be simply a needs-based check-in. It might actually, as I said, be a whole higher order session of let's solve this first before we start trying to solve that. It's like when we have something uncomfortable to talk about. Yeah, when we have something uncomfortable to talk about, this is how I'm describing the situation, this is the empathy for you, this is what I'm needing, and what creative solution can we come up with that'll make it possible for us to have a difficult discussion.
Yeah, got it. I guess where I'm stuck is like the solution based, but I can work that through.
In this particular context?
I think I just figured it out in my own mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So, the end of this particular process might be next Thursday at 8 p.m. We'll climb onto the roof and look at the moon together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. How we're going to be in exchanging this difficult communication.
Yeah. And what do I need and what do you need in order to feel ready?
Right. That's also, this other NVC group that I belong to, we all start the session with what's going on with us. We all bring something. And then we choose one of the things, and then we go around. Everybody articulates what it is that they think. They're making their guess, basically. But in the end, the person who has posed the issue typically figures it all out because of just being guessed at.
Very self-directed, eh?
But it's not solution-based. That's where I was getting hung up. But in the figuring out how we can exchange is somewhat, we're having to find a solution to make both comfortable.
So there's also quite a difference when you're facilitating somebody else and you're not experiencing a problem.
Yeah, true.
So I just want to highlight something there that I think some of you have maybe consciously noticed and others haven't consciously noticed. Because I am a relatively low context person and I came into this whole field of offering something online because all of the SDE information out there and all of the horizontal type communication stuff out there that I had encountered was so very high context that I saw a need to bring in more low context articulation, making things explicit and clear. That's also one of the reasons why this course and even this call is skewed in the direction of low context. So I am not that involved in what you've just described, checking in with everybody, getting you to pair off and practice, all of that would be much more high context, which is fantastic and necessary and important. But I kind of say, okay, go and do that stuff and then come back and we'll unpack it and we'll bring in the the low context and we'll figure it out, we'll unpick it, we'll analyze it, we'll articulate it. It's just simply a different angle of it that I prioritize, because in my experience, most of everybody else is prioritizing the other parts of it already. So I had to read like 30 books on STE. I don't know how many are in the Sudbury Starter Kit. It's amazing, to try and distill what I write in a chapter or 5. And I think we need both. Again, it's not an either or. So that's why I'm always sort of saying, it'd be great if people practice. And this particular channel originally started as a place for you guys to meet and practice with each other, and unfortunately that didn't take off, and I think it's partly because of exactly what we're talking about tonight. It's difficult to get something like that going when it's not face to face. I think it's easier to practice face to face with people in your life. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that. It's the last few minutes of the call. Does anybody have something that they really need to bring before we leave? I want to actually ask as well how everybody feels about this particular call maybe being public, because there's some, I don't know, there's just some articulations in this call that I think are useful, and I don't think it went very personal, but I don't know how other people feel about that. I think I would obviously definitely have to check with people who've already left, one specifically as well, but the people who are on the call right now, how do you feel about this call being public? Maybe.
Fine by me.
If anybody has reservations about it, you can either speak up now, or you can just send me a message in the next 24, because what I'll do now is I'll just put it up for you guys on an unlisted, as I usually do, and then if I don't have any objections within the next 24, then I think I'll put it up. The whole public service thing. Okay.
The whole what?
Public service thing. It's just been so hugely useful for me that there's all this freely available, incredible information on the internet. I like to return the favor. Okay then. Thank you everybody. And we'll meet, I think it's next week is the special topic, but I don't think we have any requests yet for the special topic, so feel free to send some suggestions. Yeah.
Thank you. This was great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye
Thanks very
everybody.
much.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.